Sprinting through JFK Terminal 4, the investment banker heard the dreaded announcement echo through the corridors. Final call for Flight 1847 to Dallas. Alaric Sterling's $3,000 Italian leather shoes slapped against the polished floor as he clutched his daughter's tiny hand. Her other arm wrapped around a stuffed elephant. This was it, his last chance to save Sterling and Associates from complete collapse. But as fate would have it, 3-year-old Emma chose that exact moment to have a nuclear meltdown. "Daddy, I want Mommy!" she screamed, throwing herself onto the cold terminal floor. Passengers stared. Security approached, and Alaric watched helplessly as his company's future, and his dead wife's legacy, literally flew away without him. 45 minutes later, he sat on a bench in the nearly empty terminal. His navy wool suit wrinkled, his perfect composure shattered. Emma had finally exhausted herself to sleep in his arms. That's when he noticed her. A woman sat cross-legged on the floor near gate 23, holding a baby wrapped in a cream blanket dotted with tiny flowers. She wore an oversized olive-green cardigan that had seen better days, her dark hair tangled and unwashed. But her eyes, sharp, intelligent, watchful, reminded him painfully of his late wife Sarah. She looked up and caught him staring. "Rough day?" she asked softly, her voice carrying an educated accent that didn't match her appearance. Alaric found himself walking over, something he'd never done in his 35 years of carefully constructed walls. "The worst," he admitted, still holding his sleeping daughter. "You?" "Same," she replied, adjusting the baby in her arms. "Been here since yesterday. Missed my connection." Something broke inside him then. Maybe it was the exhaustion, maybe it was seeing another parent struggling, or maybe it was the way she held that baby with such protective dignity despite having nothing. Alaric reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his keys. The keys to his Connecticut estate that he'd been too grief-stricken to return to since Sarah's death 2 years ago. "I'm flying to California for 3 months. Emergency project," he heard himself saying. "There's a house in Connecticut. Big, empty. You and your baby can stay there." The woman's eyes widened. I can't accept. Please." His voice cracked. "It's just sitting empty anyway. Someone should be living in it, making it feel like a home again." She studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to read his soul. Finally, she reached out and took the keys. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm Alaric." He wrote his address on the back of a business card. "Take care of the place. There's a garden Sarah loved. Maybe you could." He couldn't finish the sentence. Instead, he stood up, holding Emma close, and walked toward his gate for the next available flight to LAX. What Alaric didn't know was that those keys weren't just offering shelter to a stranger. They were about to unlock the truth behind his wife's death, and change both their lives forever. 3 months later, when he finally returned to reclaim his solitude, Alaric Sterling would discover that some acts of kindness have consequences that reach far beyond what we can imagine. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. The weight of those keys felt heavier in Alara's palm than they should have. She sat in the same spot on the terminal floor for another hour after Alaric Sterling disappeared into the crowd. His sleeping daughter draped over his shoulder like a small anchor to a world he was clearly drowning in. The business card in her other hand read Sterling and Associates Investment Banking in elegant script, with an address in Westport, Connecticut that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. Alara Chun had been many things in her 32 years. Forensic accountant, fraud investigator, whistleblower, and now homeless single mother to 6-month-old Lucas. But she'd never been a charity case until Meridian Financial destroyed her career 18 months ago. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was holding keys from a man whose firm name she didn't recognize, when the last firm she'd investigated had cost her everything. "What do you think, baby?" she whispered to Lucas, who gurgled and reached for the shiny keys. Should we trust a stranger who gives away houses to people he just met? But as she looked around the terminal at the janitors beginning their late-night cleaning routines, at the security guards who'd been eyeing her with increasing suspicion, she realized she didn't have much choice. The shelter had a waiting list. Her car had been repossessed last month, and Lucas deserved better than sleeping on airport benches. 3 hours later, she was standing in front of a colonial mansion that belonged in architectural magazines, not in the life of someone like her. The cab driver had looked skeptical when she'd given him the address, and even more skeptical when she'd paid him with crumpled bills from various pockets. But the key fit. The door opened, and suddenly Alara was standing in a foyer that could have housed her entire previous apartment. The house felt frozen in time, like a museum dedicated to a life that had ended abruptly. Family photos lined the mantel. Alaric with a beautiful woman who had his same intelligent eyes, but warmer. A little girl growing from baby to toddler in the progression of frames. The woman disappeared from the photos somewhere around Emma's 2nd birthday, leaving only father and daughter in increasingly forced smiles. Alara found herself in what was clearly the master bedroom, where men's clothes hung alone in a walk-in closet big enough to be a studio apartment. The other side of the closet remained untouched, women's clothes still organized by color and season. A vanity held perfume bottles with dust gathered around their bases. Whoever she was, she'd been gone long enough for grief to settle into the house's bones, but not long enough for Alaric to let go. The nursery broke her heart completely. A crib stood ready for a child who'd outgrown it, toys organized with the precision of someone who was afraid to disturb a memory. Lucas stirred in her arms as if sensing the weight of sadness in the room, and Alara quickly retreated to the guest bedroom down the hall. That first night, she lay awake staring at ceiling moldings that probably cost more than her last year's rent, wondering what kind of desperation drove a man to give his house keys to a complete stranger. But as Lucas slept peacefully in his travel carrier beside the bed, the first safe, warm place he'd had in weeks, she decided not to question the gift too deeply. Alaric's red-eye flight to Los Angeles felt like an escape from his own life, which was exactly what he needed. Emma was staying with his sister Rebecca in Manhattan, which meant for the first time in 2 years, he was alone with his thoughts. This was either going to be therapeutic or completely devastating. The Meridian financial crisis had erupted like a financial wildfire across 3 states, and somehow Sterling and Associates had been tapped to lead the cleanup effort. It should have been the deal of his career, the kind of high-stakes corporate restructuring that made reputations and fortunes. Instead, it felt like a last desperate attempt to prove his firm could survive without the steady hand of his partner, Silas Vane, who'd been pressuring him to sell for months. "You're not the same man you were before Sarah died," Silas had told him last week, his voice carrying the kind of practiced sympathy that always made Alaric's skin crawl. "Maybe it's time to consider stepping back. Let someone else carry the burden." But Alaric knew what Silas really meant. "Let me buy you out while you're vulnerable. Let me take over the firm your father built. Let me profit from your grief." The California office was a glass monument to everything Alaric usually despised about West Coast business culture. All open concepts and kombucha on tap. But the Meridian files were a beautiful nightmare of complexity that required every bit of his analytical training. Energy sector fraud spanning 15 years, shell companies nested inside shell companies, accounting irregularities that read like a masterclass in creative mathematics. He threw himself into the work with the kind of manic focus that had built his career and destroyed his marriage. 18-hour days blended into 20-hour days. He took meals at his desk, slept on the office couch, and spoke to Emma through video calls that grew shorter and less frequent as the weeks passed. It was during his 3rd week in California that he started seeing patterns in the Meridian fraud that made his blood run cold. The shell companies weren't random. The energy contracts followed a specific geographic pattern. And the timeline of the fraud, it started exactly 3 years ago, right around the time Sarah had been killed in that car accident. Sarah, who'd been working late at her environmental law firm. Sarah, who'd been investigating some kind of energy sector corruption before she died. Sarah, who'd never mentioned that her case might involve the same financial networks he was now untangling. Alaric stared at the computer screen until the numbers blurred together, wondering if grief was making him see connections that weren't there. But forensic accounting didn't lie. The patterns were real. The question was what they meant. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, Alara was falling in love with a dead woman's life. She'd intended to stay only a few days, just long enough to figure out her next move. But the house seemed to welcome her presence in a way that surprised them both. Lucas thrived in the warmth and safety, finally sleeping through the night. And Alara found herself taking care of the place with a devotion that went beyond gratitude. She cleaned rooms that clearly hadn't been touched since Alaric's wife died. She watered plants that had somehow survived on neglect and automatic sprinkler systems. She organized closets and drawers with the precision of someone who understood that sometimes order was the only thing standing between you and complete emotional collapse. It was while cleaning what appeared to be a home office that Alara found the first clue that her presence in this house wasn't entirely coincidental. The room was clearly a woman's workspace, Sarah's, according to the nameplate on the desk. Environmental law diplomas covered one wall, along with photos of solar farms and wind turbines. Legal briefs were stacked with the kind of organization that spoke to Alara's forensic soul. And tucked behind a framed photo of Alaric and Emma was a folder marked Meridian Energy, Confidential. Alara's hands shook as she opened the folder. She knew that name. Meridian Energy was the company that had destroyed her career, the case that had gotten her blacklisted from every accounting firm on the East Coast. She tried to expose their fraudulent carbon credit schemes 18 months ago, and they'd buried her so thoroughly that she'd lost her job, her apartment, and eventually her ability to support her son. But Sarah Sterling had been investigating Meridian too, apparently. And from the dates on the legal briefs, she'd been getting close to something big right before she died. Alara spread Sarah's files across the desk, her forensic training kicking in despite the surreal circumstances. Environmental law wasn't her expertise, but fraud was fraud, and the patterns were clear. Sarah had been building a case that would have exposed not just Meridian's carbon credit manipulation, but a whole network of shell companies designed to hide energy sector corruption. The same shell companies that had made Alara's accusations look like the ravings of a disgruntled employee when she tried to blow the whistle. As Lucas napped in his carrier beside her, Alara began to reconstruct Sarah's investigation. The woman had been brilliant, methodical, thorough, and apparently very close to exposing something that powerful people desperately wanted to keep hidden. Close enough that her death in a car accident started to seem less like a tragedy and more like a convenient solution to someone's problem. The pieces of a conspiracy began to form in Alara's mind, but she needed more information. She needed access to financial records that Sarah wouldn't have had as an environmental lawyer. She needed the kind of forensic analysis that had been her specialty before Meridian destroyed her life. She needed to get into Alaric's home computer. It took her 3 days to crack his password, Emma 2019, the year his daughter was born and his wife died. His financial files were a maze of encrypted folders and protected documents, but Alara had been trained by the FBI before going into private practice. She knew how to navigate digital security when the stakes were high enough. What she found made her blood run cold. Sterling and Associates wasn't just investigating Meridian Financial's collapse. They were financially entangled with the entire network of companies that Sarah had been trying to expose. Worse, Alaric's partner, Silas Vane, appeared to be one of the primary architects of the fraud scheme that had cost Alara her career and possibly Sarah her life. While Alara was discovering the truth about her benefactor's business, Alaric was 3,000 miles away, fielding the most disturbing phone call of his career. "Alaric, we need to talk about the Connecticut situation." Silas Vane's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "I've been getting some very concerning reports about your judgment lately." Alaric looked up from the Meridian files scattered across his temporary desk. "What are you talking about, Silas?" "I'm talking about you giving your house keys to some vagrant you picked up at the airport. I'm talking about you abandoning your daughter to chase ghosts in California. I'm talking about behavior that frankly makes me question whether you're mentally competent to run this firm anymore." The words hit Alaric like a physical blow. "How do you know about?" "I know because I've been keeping an eye on our assets, since you seem incapable of doing so. There's a homeless woman and her illegitimate child living in your house, Alaric. They've been there for over a month. What do you think our clients are going to say when they find out? What do you think Emma's custody evaluators are going to say?" Alaric's mouth went dry. He'd forgotten about the custody evaluation Rebecca had mentioned, something about ensuring Emma's financial future was secure. "Silas, it's not what you... It's exactly what I think. You're having a breakdown and it's affecting your ability to lead this company. I've been patient because of your loss, but patience has limits. Sign the buyout agreement, take some time to get your head straight, and let me protect what your father built." The line went dead, leaving Alaric staring at his phone in the glow of the California office's automated lighting. Outside the windows, Los Angeles sprawled in all directions, a maze of lights and possibilities that suddenly felt very far from home. He thought about Alara, wondering what kind of person she really was. He thought about Emma, safe with Rebecca but probably wondering why Daddy had disappeared again. And he thought about Sarah, whose ghost seemed to be haunting every decision he made lately. But mostly, he thought about the patterns he'd been seeing in the Meridian files. The shell companies that didn't quite add up. The energy contracts that seemed designed to hide rather than reveal. The financial network that kept pointing back to firms and people he was supposed to trust. For the first time in 2 years, Alaric Sterling was beginning to wonder if his wife's death had been as accidental as everyone claimed. Back in Connecticut, Alara was about to discover that some secrets were hidden in the most innocent places. She'd been living in the house for 6 weeks when she decided to tackle Emma's playroom. The little girl had clearly outgrown most of her toys, and Alara thought she might organize them for when Emma returned. It was while sorting through a collection of stuffed animals that she found something that made her forensic accountant instinct scream. Hidden inside a teddy bear's zippered pouch was a small USB drive. The bear was well worn, clearly one of Emma's favorites, but the drive was new. Someone had hidden it deliberately, in a place where only someone cleaning very thoroughly would think to look. Alara plugged the drive into Sarah's computer, her heart pounding as the files loaded. What she found was 18 months of financial records, bank statements, and accounting ledgers that read like a roadmap to the largest energy sector fraud in American history. The files were incredibly detailed. Someone with serious forensic training had compiled them. Shell companies nested 7 layers deep. Energy contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars that existed only on paper. Carbon credit transactions that violated every environmental law on the books. And at the center of it all, a network of financial firms that included Sterling and Associates. But the most devastating revelation was a series of email exchanges between Silas Vane and executives at Meridian Energy. Exchanges that proved Vane hadn't just been involved in the fraud, he'd been orchestrating it, using Sterling and Associates' reputation to legitimize fake transactions, using Alaric's trust to gain access to client accounts, using the firm's resources to hide hundreds of millions of dollars in stolen money. The emails were dated right up until Sarah's death. The last one, sent 3 days before her accident, contained a single line that made Alara's blood freeze. The Sterling problem needs to be resolved permanently. Alara sat back in Sarah's chair, staring at the screen as the implications crashed over her like a wave. Sarah Sterling hadn't just been investigating fraud, she'd uncovered it. She'd been preparing to expose the very network that had destroyed Alara's career. And someone had killed her for it. Someone who was now trying to steal Alaric's company while he was 3,000 miles away, isolated and vulnerable. Someone who knew exactly where Alara was and what she might discover in this house. As if summoned by her thoughts, her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? She answered carefully. Ms. Chen. The voice was smooth, professional, and terrifying in its calm familiarity. I think it's time we met face to face. Who is this? Someone who's been very interested in your research. You've been quite busy since arriving at the Sterling house, haven't you? Quite the coincidence that Sarah's investigation and your previous work both led to the same place. Alara's blood turned to ice. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. Just like you don't know about the USB drive you found in Emma's teddy bear. Just like you don't know about the financial records you've been so carefully analyzing. You always were thorough, Miss Chen. It's what made you such a threat at Meridian, and it's what makes you a threat now. The voice paused, and in the silence, Alara could hear Lucas stirring in his carrier upstairs. You have something that belongs to me, the voice continued. And I have resources you can't imagine. Walk away now and you can keep your son safe. Continue this investigation and you'll end up like Sarah Sterling. The choice is yours. The line went dead.
Alara sat in the growing darkness of Sarah's office, surrounded by evidence of a fraud that had killed one woman and destroyed her own life. Holding the phone that had just delivered what amounted to a death threat. Lucas's soft breathing came through the baby monitor, the most precious sound in her world and now the most vulnerable. She looked at the computer screen, at the files that could expose everything, at the truth that Sarah Sterling had died protecting. Then she looked at the keys Alaric had given her, remembering the broken man in the airport who'd trusted a stranger with his most valuable possession. Some choices weren't really choices at all. Alara copied the files to every device she could find, uploaded them to 3 different cloud storage accounts, and prepared for war. Because if Silas Vane thought he could use Alaric's grief and her desperation to cover up murder and fraud, he was about to discover that some storms, once started, couldn't be stopped. And sometimes the most dangerous person in the room was the one everyone underestimated. The homeless woman with nothing to lose was about to become the most powerful person in a very dangerous game. The surveillance started 3 days after the threatening phone call. Alara first noticed the black sedan parked across from the house when she was feeding Lucas his morning bottle by the kitchen window. The same car appeared again that afternoon when she took Lucas for a walk around the neighborhood, its tinted windows reflecting nothing but her own growing paranoia. By the 3rd day, she was certain. Someone was watching the house, and they weren't trying very hard to hide it. Alara had learned to trust her instincts during her forensic accounting days. The ability to spot patterns that others missed had made her career before it destroyed it. The pattern here was clear. Escalating intimidation designed to make her run before she could do any more damage. But running meant abandoning the evidence that could expose Sarah's murder and clear her own name. Running meant letting Silas Vane win. She was copying the last of Sarah's files to a secure server when she heard the footsteps on the front porch. Not the confident stride of a delivery person or the hesitant approach of a neighbor. These were the measured steps of someone who belonged here, someone with authority. Alara grabbed Lucas from his bouncy seat and crept to the living room window, peering through the blinds. 3 men in dark suits stood on the porch, one of them speaking into a phone, while another examined the front door lock with professional interest. Private security, probably. The kind of people who made problems disappear. Lucas chose that moment to let out a piercing cry that seemed to echo through the house like a fire alarm. Alara clamped her hand over his mouth, but it was too late. The conversation on the porch stopped. Footsteps moved around the house toward the back. Her phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Open the door. Ms. Chun. We just want to talk. Alara's training kicked in. She grabbed the diaper bag she'd kept packed since the first threatening call, slung it over her shoulder with Lucas still in her arms, and headed for the basement. Sarah's office had a window that led to the backyard, but if they were watching the house properly, that exit would be covered too. The pounding on the front door started as she reached the basement stairs. Authoritative, impatient. The kind of knocking that said they'd be coming in whether she opened the door or not. Ms. Chun. A voice called through the door. We know you're in there. We just need to retrieve some documents that were taken from our client. No one needs to get hurt. Their client. As if Silas Vane was just another businessman conducting normal business instead of a murderer covering his tracks. Alara found what she was looking for in the basement. A bulkhead door that led directly outside, hidden behind stacked storage boxes. Sarah had been thorough in her home security, apparently. Or maybe she'd been preparing for exactly this kind of situation. The sound of splintering would came from upstairs as Alara pushed open the bulkhead door. Lucas was crying again, but quietly now, as if he sensed the danger they were in. She crawled out into the darkness of the backyard, staying low as she moved toward the trees that bordered the property. Behind her, she could hear voices in the house, systematic and professional. They were searching room by room, looking for the evidence she'd already uploaded to servers they'd never find. But they didn't know that yet. Her car was parked in the driveway, completely exposed. But Sarah's car was still in the garage, a Honda that Alaric probably hadn't driven since his wife's death. Alara had found the keys hanging on a hook in the kitchen, along with all the other remnants of a life interrupted. She worked her way around the house, using the trees and shadows as cover. Lucas had gone quiet in her arms, his small body warm against her chest. From inside the house, she could hear furniture being moved, drawers being opened, the systematic destruction of Sarah's carefully preserved world. The garage was dark and smelled of dust and old motor oil. Sarah's Honda started on the third try, the engine turning over with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the confined space. But the garage door was electric, and opening it would announce her presence to everyone within 100 yards. Alara looked at the door, at her son, at the choice between certain capture and probable death. Then she put the car in reverse and floored the accelerator. The garage door exploded outward in a shower of wood and metal. The Honda burst into the driveway like a cork from a champagne bottle, its rear windshield spiderwebbing from the impact. Shouts erupted from inside the house as Alara spun the wheel and accelerated toward the street. In her rearview mirror, she saw the three men running from the house, one of them speaking rapidly into a phone. But they were too late. She was already turning onto the main road, Lucas crying in his car seat as the broken glass from the rear windshield glittered on the upholstery around them. Her phone rang as she merged onto I-95, heading north toward nowhere in particular. She almost didn't answer it, assuming it would be another threat. But the caller ID showed a name she'd been hoping to see for weeks. Alaric Sterling. Alara? His voice was tight with panic. Are you all right? I just got a call from my security company. Someone broke into my house. It wasn't a break-in, she said, checking her mirrors for pursuit. It was a recovery operation. They were looking for evidence your wife gathered before she died. Silence on the line. Then, what evidence? Alara, what's going on? She took a deep breath, knowing that what she said next would either save them both or get them killed. Alaric, your wife didn't die in an accident. She was murdered, and your business partner is the one who killed her. The silence stretched so long that she thought the connection had been lost. Finally, Alaric's voice came back, barely a whisper. I'm coming home. No, she said urgently. It's not safe. They know I found Sarah's files. They'll be watching. I'm already at JFK, he interrupted. I caught the first flight when I got the security alert. I'll be there in 2 hours. Alaric, listen to me. Silas Vane is behind this. He's been using your firm to launder money through energy sector fraud. Sarah found out and he had her killed. If you go back to that house, then we'll face him together, Alaric said, his voice carrying a steel she'd never heard before. Sarah deserves justice, and so do you. The line went dead, leaving Alara alone on the highway with her crying son and the weight of a truth that could destroy one of the most powerful men in New York finance. She looked at the gas gauge, half full, enough to run for hours if she needed to. She could disappear, take Lucas somewhere safe, let Alaric fight his own battles. But Sarah's files were still on that USB drive, still locked in the cloud servers only Alara could access. And Silas Vane was still free to destroy more lives, more families, more women who asked too many questions. Alara took the next exit and turned around, heading back toward Connecticut and whatever was waiting for her there. Some battles chose you whether you wanted them or not. Alaric's hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel of his rental car, pushing the speedometer past 80 as he raced through the Connecticut darkness. The call from Alara had shattered something inside him. Not his composure, but the careful wall of denial he'd built around Sarah's death. Car accident. That's what he'd been told, what he'd accepted, what he'd grieved. Wet roads, a sharp turn, a moment of inattention that ended a life and broke a family. But as he replayed every detail of Sarah's final weeks, new patterns emerged in his memory like invisible ink exposed to heat. Sarah working late, but not on her usual environmental cases. Sarah asking strange questions about his business, about Silas, about clients she shouldn't have known about. Sarah seeming distracted, worried, looking over her shoulder in ways that he'd attributed to the stress of new motherhood. Sarah leaving Emma with a babysitter to attend meetings she wouldn't discuss. Sarah backing up files to drives she hid around the house. Sarah kissing him goodbye that last morning with an intensity that felt like farewell. The signs had been there. He'd just been too busy building his career to read them. His phone rang as he turned onto his street. Alara's number. "Where are you?" she asked without preamble. 2 minutes out. "Where are you?" "Parked at the end of your street." "Alaric, there are cars at your house. Multiple vehicles. This isn't just surveillance anymore." Alaric slowed as he crested the hill that led to his house. She was right. The circular driveway that usually stood empty was crowded with black sedans and a silver Mercedes he recognized as Silas's car. Light blazed from every window, as if the house was hosting a party. "He's already here," Alaric said, his voice flat with realization. "Silas is at my house. We need to call the police. And tell them what? That my business partner is in my house with my permission. That a homeless woman I gave keys to thinks he murdered my wife." Alaric pulled over and killed the engine. "They'll think I'm having a breakdown." Which is exactly what Silas wants. Through his windshield, he could see figures moving past the windows of his house. Systematic, professional. They were searching for something, and they clearly hadn't found it yet. "Alara," he said quietly. "The evidence Sarah gathered. You have it. Copies in multiple locations. Financial records, emails, bank statements. Everything needed to prove the fraud and link Silas to your wife's death. Can you access it remotely?" Pause. "Yes." "Why?" Alaric looked at his house, at the cars in his driveway, at the life that had been stolen from him 2 years ago. "Because it's time to end this. Meet me at the main gate in 5 minutes. And bring everything you can access on your phone." He hung up and called another number, one he'd memorized but never thought he'd use. "Agent Morrison? This is Alaric Sterling. Remember that conversation we had about financial irregularities in the energy sector? I think it's time we talked." The FBI had been investigating energy sector fraud for over a year, Morrison told him. They'd been looking for someone with inside access to the financial networks, someone who could provide the evidence they needed to make arrests. Alaric's call was exactly what they'd been waiting for. "How long do you need?" Morrison asked. 1 hour, Alaric replied, watching Alara's Honda creep up the street toward him. "Maybe less. We'll be ready." Alara parked behind his rental car and got out carrying Lucas, who had finally fallen asleep despite the chaos of the evening. She looked exhausted, terrified, and more beautiful than any woman had a right to look under the circumstances. "You came back," he said. "So did you." They stood in the darkness outside his house, two broken people who'd found each other in an airport and somehow become each other's salvation. "Alara," he said, "I need you to know something before we go in there. Whatever happens, whatever Silas says or does, this isn't your fault. Sarah's death, the fraud, the cover-up, none of it is your fault." She shifted Lucas in her arms. "What if we can't prove it? What if he's destroyed all the evidence? Then we'll have died trying to get justice for a woman who deserved better than the hand she was dealt." Alaric touched her face gently. "But we're not going to die. We're going to walk into that house, confront the man who murdered my wife, and make sure he pays for what he's done. Together. Together." They walked up the driveway hand in hand, Lucas sleeping peacefully between them, toward whatever was waiting in the house where Sarah Sterling had hidden the evidence that would either save them or destroy them all. The front door stood open, spilling light onto the porch like an invitation to hell. From inside came the sound of voices, furniture being moved, and the systematic destruction of a home that had already been broken once. Alaric squeezed Alara's hand as they crossed the threshold together. "Silas?" he called into the chaos. "I'm home." The destruction stopped. Footsteps approached from deeper in the house, and Silas Vane stepped into the foyer wearing the same expression of practiced sympathy he'd perfected over 2 years of slowly stealing Alaric's life. "Alaric," Silas said smoothly, "thank God you're home. We've been so worried about you." Behind him stood 3 men in dark suits who looked like they'd stepped out of a corporate security manual. Professional, efficient, and completely without conscience. "I can see that," Alaric replied, looking at the overturned furniture, the scattered books, the framed photos that had been pulled from the walls. "Very worried indeed." Silas's eyes shifted to Alara, and his expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "And you must be the tenant we've heard so much about. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. This house isn't available for occupancy right now." "No misunderstanding," Alara said quietly. "I know exactly why I'm here." "Do you?" Silas stepped closer, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that somehow managed to sound more threatening than shouting. "Because I think you're a mentally unstable woman who's taken advantage of a grieving man's generosity. I think you've been living in someone else's house, going through someone else's belongings, and making wild accusations to cover your own criminal behavior." "Criminal behavior?" Alaric's voice cut through the room like a blade. "The only criminal here is you, Silas." For the first time, Silas's mask slipped. The practiced sympathy disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Alaric, you're clearly not thinking straight. The stress of the California project, the pressure of single parenthood, it's obviously affecting your judgment. Why don't you let me handle this situation while you get the help you need?" "The help I need," Alaric repeated slowly, "is the truth about how my wife died." Silence fell over the room like a curtain. Even the security team stopped moving, sensing that the conversation had shifted into dangerous territory. "Your wife died in a car accident," Silas said carefully. "A tragic accident that we all grieved together." "Sarah died," Alara said, "because she discovered you were using Sterling and Associates to launder money through fraudulent energy contracts. She died because she was preparing to expose a fraud scheme worth hundreds of millions of dollars." Silas laughed, but the sound held no humor. "The fantasies of a homeless woman who's been living illegally in a dead woman's house. Hardly credible, wouldn't you say? What about the USB drive?" Alara shifted Lucas in her arms, her voice steady despite the danger radiating from every person in the room. "The one hidden in Emma's teddy bear? The one with 18 months of financial records proving that you've been embezzling from your own clients." The change in Silas was instantaneous. The mask didn't slip, it shattered completely. "Where is it?" "Safe," Alaric said, "along with copies of everything Sarah gathered before you killed her." "I didn't kill anyone," Silas snapped. "Sarah's death was an accident. A convenient accident, perhaps, but an accident nonetheless. The admission hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Alara felt Lucas stir in her arms as if sensing the tension, and she held him closer. Convenient, Alaric repeated. Convenient that she died 3 days after sending you an email asking about irregularities in the Meridian Energy contracts. Convenient that her car went off the road on a clear night with no other traffic. Convenient that the brake lines were never properly examined because you convinced me not to request an autopsy. You were grieving, Silas said, his voice taking on the practiced sympathy again. I was protecting you from additional pain. You were protecting yourself from exposure. Alara stepped forward, pulling out her phone. Should I show him the emails, Alaric? The ones where he discusses this Sterling problem with Meridian executives? The ones where they talk about permanent solutions to women who ask too many questions. That's enough, Silas said, and suddenly there was a gun in his hand. One of the security team must have passed it to him, because Alara hadn't seen him reach for anything. You've both said quite enough. Lucas woke up and began to cry, as if sensing the danger that suddenly filled the room. The sound was heartbreaking in its innocence. A baby's cry in a room full of adults planning murder. You're going to kill us, Alaric said. It wasn't a question. I'm going to solve a problem, Silas corrected. The same way I solved the Sarah problem. Tragic murder-suicide. Grieving widower kills the woman who's been taking advantage of him, then turns the gun on himself. The baby will be collateral damage, unfortunately, but these things happen in domestic situations. The FBI won't believe it, Alara said. Silas smiled. The FBI isn't investigating this case. And by the time they get involved, all the evidence will have been destroyed in the fire that burns down this house with your bodies inside it. He raised the gun, pointing it first at Alara, then at Alaric as if deciding who should die first. Any last words? Just one, Alaric said. Now. The front windows exploded inward as FBI agents rappelled through the glass. The front door burst open as a tactical team poured into the foyer. Red laser dots danced across Silas's chest as a dozen weapons trained on him from multiple directions. Federal agents. Agent Morrison's voice cut through the chaos. Drop your weapon. For a moment, Silas looked like he might fight. The gun wavered in his hand, his eyes darting between Alaric and the federal agents surrounding him. Then his shoulders sagged as he realized the game was over. The gun clattered to the floor. Silas Vane, Morrison said, stepping forward with handcuffs. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and the murder of Sarah Sterling. As they read him his rights, Silas looked back at Alaric with something that might have been regret. She was supposed to stay out of it, he said quietly. Sarah was supposed to leave the business alone. She was supposed to live, Alaric replied. She was supposed to watch our daughter grow up. They led Silas away in handcuffs, along with his security team. The house fell quiet except for Lucas's crying and the sound of evidence technicians beginning their work. Agent Morrison approached Alaric and Alara, who were holding each other in the wreckage of the foyer. Ms. Chun will need access to those financial records you mentioned. Mr. Sterling, we'll need your cooperation in tracing the money trail through your firm's accounts. Whatever you need, Alaric said. This case is going to trial. Are you both prepared for what that means? Media attention, testimony, your private lives becoming public record. Alara looked at Alaric, at Lucas sleeping peacefully in her arms despite everything that had happened, at the house where Sarah Sterling had died trying to protect the truth. We're prepared, she said. Justice, it turned out, was just another kind of partnership. The trial of Silas Vane became the financial story of the decade. Federal prosecutors used Alara's forensic analysis to trace a fraud scheme that had stolen over $400 million from pension funds, environmental groups, and small investors who'd believed they were supporting clean energy initiatives. The money had been funneled through shell companies registered in 12 different states, laundered through fake carbon credit transactions, and ultimately used to fund luxury lifestyles for a small group of energy executives who decided that environmental law was just another business opportunity. Sarah Sterling had discovered the scheme while investigating Meridian Energy for a client. Her environmental law background had made her suspicious of carbon credit transactions that seemed too good to be true. Her legal training had taught her to follow paper trails until they led to the truth. And her murder had been ordered the day she'd sent an email to Silas Vane asking why Sterling and Associates was processing payments for companies that didn't appear to exist. The evidence Alara found in Sarah's files, combined with the financial records hidden in Emma's teddy bear, provided prosecutors with a complete map of the fraud network. Bank statements, email exchanges, forged documents, and recorded phone calls that painted a picture of systematic corruption stretching back 5 years. Silas Vane was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge noted that his crime wasn't just financial fraud, but the murder of a woman who died trying to protect the environment and expose corruption. Sarah Sterling believed in justice, the judge said at sentencing. Her death was not just a personal tragedy, but an attack on the principles of law and environmental protection she spent her life defending. For Alaric, the trial was both vindication and torture. Vindication because the truth finally came out. Torture because he had to relive Sarah's death while learning details about her final weeks that broke his heart all over again. She'd known she was in danger. The evidence was clear in her files, in the precautions she'd taken, in the USB drive she'd hidden where only someone who truly loved Emma would think to look. She'd been preparing for the possibility that she might not survive to see justice done. But she'd trusted that someone else would finish what she'd started. Someone who shared her commitment to truth and her refusal to let corruption flourish in darkness. She'd trusted Alaric, even though she'd never told him what she was doing. And in the end, that trust had been justified. The merger with Meridian Financial was called off, obviously. But the California project had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. With Silas's embezzlement exposed and the stolen money recovered, Sterling and Associates was not only solvent but profitable. More importantly, the firm was clean. The taint of corruption that had threatened to destroy everything Alaric's father had built was gone, replaced by a reputation for integrity that attracted new clients and new opportunities. Alaric could have rebuilt the firm exactly as it had been, hired new partners, returned to the high-stakes world of investment banking that had consumed his life before Sarah's death. Instead, he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He hired Alara Chun as his chief financial officer. "Are you sure about this?" she asked during their first official meeting in what had once been Silas's corner office. "I'm a forensic accountant, not an investment banker. I know how to catch fraud, not how to make money." "Maybe that's exactly what this firm needs," Alaric replied. "Someone who cares more about doing things right than doing them profitably." Lucas gurgled happily from his carrier in the corner of the office, surrounded by toys that Emma had outgrown and generously donated to her new brother. The transition from homeless single mother to CFO of a major investment firm might have seemed impossible 6 months ago, but Alara had learned that impossibility was just another word for unexpected opportunity. Her first initiative was implementing the most comprehensive fraud detection system in the industry. Every transaction, every client, every investment would be scrutinized with the same forensic precision that had exposed Silas's crimes. Sterling and Associates would never again be used as a vehicle for corruption. Her second initiative was establishing a foundation in Sarah Sterling's name, dedicated to supporting environmental lawyers and whistleblowers who risked their careers to expose corporate fraud. The foundation's first grant went to a young lawyer in Texas who was investigating illegal dumping by petrochemical companies. "Sarah would have liked that," Alaric said when Alara showed him the grant application. "I hope so," she replied. "I never got to meet her, but I feel like I know her through her work. She was remarkable." "She was," Alaric agreed. "And so are you." The Connecticut house became home again, but differently than before. Emma's laughter filled rooms that had been silent too long. Lucas's baby equipment appeared in corners where expensive art had once stood. Toys scattered across marble floors, and the sound of children playing echoed through halls that had been museums to grief. Alara moved into the guest room permanently, but everyone understood it was temporary until they figured out what they meant to each other. They were family, certainly. Lucas called Alaric Daddy, and Emma called Alara Mama Lara, with the easy acceptance of children who understood that love made families, not biology. But the romantic aspect of their relationship developed slowly, carefully, like a business partnership built on trust rather than passion. They had both been broken by loss and betrayal. They both needed time to heal before they could offer their hearts to someone else. The healing happened in small moments. Alaric teaching Lucas to walk in the same living room where Emma had taken her first steps. Elara helping Emma with homework at the kitchen table where Sarah had once paid bills and planned environmental lawsuits. Family dinners where they talked about their days and planned weekend adventures and slowly became something neither of them had expected to find. They were sitting on the front porch one evening, watching the children play in the yard where Sarah had once planted roses, when Elara asked the question that had been growing between them for months. What happens now? Alaric looked at her, at Lucas chasing fireflies with Emma, at the house where so much pain had been transformed into so much joy. I don't know, he said honestly. I've never been in a situation like this before. Neither have I. Elara leaned back in her chair, content in the warm evening air. I never imagined I'd end up here when I took your keys at the airport. Did you know? He asked suddenly. When you came to the house, did you know about the connection to Meridian? Did you know about Sarah's investigation? It was a question he'd wondered about for months but never asked. The coincidence had always seemed too perfect. A forensic accountant who'd been blacklisted by the same company that had killed his wife, appearing in his life exactly when he needed her most. Elara was quiet for a long time, watching the children play. I knew Meridian had destroyed my career, she said finally. I knew they were corrupt, but I didn't know about Sarah until I found her files. And then I realized that someone had put us together for a reason. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was just two broken people finding each other at exactly the right moment. She turned to look at him. Does it matter? Alaric thought about airport terminals and missed flights, about keys given to strangers and trust offered without conditions. He thought about Sarah's hidden files and Elara's forensic skills, about children playing in gardens planted by a woman they'd never meet, but whose love surrounded them still. No, he said. It doesn't matter how we found each other. It only matters what we do now. And what do we do now? He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers the way they'd done that night when they'd walked into danger together. We build something new. We raise these children. We run a company that does good work for good reasons. We make sure Sarah's foundation helps other people find the truth. And us. We take it one day at a time, he said. We see what grows between us without forcing it. We remember that the best partnerships are built on shared values, not shared trauma. Elara squeezed his hand. I love you, she said simply. I don't know what kind of love it is yet, but I love you. I love you too, he replied. And I love the life we're building together. As if summoned by their words, Emma and Lucas came running up to the porch, grass stains on their clothes and joy on their faces. Emma climbed into Alaric's lap while Lucas reached for Elara, and they sat together as a family watching the sun set over the garden where Sarah Sterling's roses bloomed year after year, tended by people who'd learned that love was the best investment anyone could make. The story that had started with a missed flight and a moment of desperate kindness had become something none of them could have planned but all of them needed. A family built from loss and hope, a company dedicated to integrity, and a love that grew from shared purpose rather than shared pain. Sometimes the most important investments weren't financial at all. Sometimes they were investments in people, in truth, in the belief that broken things could be rebuilt into something stronger than they'd ever been before. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, those investments paid dividends for the rest of your life.